So we have the code in place that will allow our microservice to connect to a Postgres database, and now we want to actually set up a Postgres database and a Docker file and update our Docker Compose YML and so forth. But before we do that, as usual, I had two typos in the main.go file inside the authentication service. The first one is there's a C missing here on this import, okay? And the second one, my IDE should have told me this, but when I ping the database here on line 57 in the OpenDB function, I have an extra parentheses. I have no idea why Visual Studio Code isn't telling me that's an error, but it's not in any case. So that's taken care of. Now let's go over to our Docker Compose over in the project folder right here, Docker Compose YML. And let's add, first of all, a Postgres database. So I'll get to the right tab level, which is at the same level as broker service. And I'll set up an entry, a service for Postgres. And I'll call it Postgres, which seems appropriate. And I'll give it an image. And my image will be Postgres : 14.0, the official Postgres image, version 14 of the database. And I'll give it its ports. Now this one I'm going to have it on port. I'll tab in one and hit the dash and space. I'm going to listen on port 5432 on my local machine, and that's mapped to 5432 in the Docker container. And that will allow me to connect using my services within Docker, and also to connect using my favorite Postgres client from my actual computer. So there's the ports. And I'll have this restart always. And I'm going to deploy this again. Deploy. And on the next line, and tab in one, mode is replicated. I don't need this, but I'm going to put it in. Replicated. And replicas will be 1. You only want one instance of that. We don't need those 3 lines, but I put them in anyway. It's just force of habit. And I need to set some environment variables. So environment, : and tab in. Postgres _user. How am I going to connect with the user Postgres? That's my username. And Postgres password. That will just be password. And the database is Postgres _db. And this will be created the first time I start this. It'll be called users. And I'm also going to set up a volume for this, just so that my data actually persists somewhere. So volumes, plural, : return, tab, dash, and I'm going to map ./db data. That'll be a file on my local computer system, /Postgres. That's going to map to, and put a trailing slash, : that's going to map to /var, /lib, /postgres, ql, /data, on the actual Docker container. So that will give me my Postgres database. Now that means I need to go over to my project folder and create a new folder called db-data. And inside of that, inside the db data folder, I'll create another folder called Postgres. And this is where the Docker container will actually store my Postgres database. So I have a local copy on my computer and I know where it is. And that's just convenient for me. Okay, so there's that image. Now the other one we want, of course, is going to be the authentication service. So I'll put that right here between these two. And I'll backspace to the correct level. So again, it's in line with broker service. And I'll call this one Authentication -service, : return, tab. And this is going to build a Docker image. And it's going to have context. The context will be : space, /, to go up one level. Then in which I have to spell right, Authentication -service, which is what that folder is named. Okay, so that's the context. Then I specify the Docker file. And it will be up one level, Authentication -service, / and then we'll have to create this in a minute, Authentication -service.docker file. So that'll have to exist. And we'll create that momentarily. So that's the build. And again, restart, always. And for this one, I'm going to say ports, and I'm going to specify a port on my local machine. So dash, I'll map 8081 on my local machine, because that's not being used, to port 80 in the Docker image. That way, if I want to authenticate directly with the auth service, I have a means of doing so. I've exposed a port I can connect to. And again, I'll put in the deploy, which I always do. And again, we probably don't need this, but it's not going to hurt anything. Mode, replicated, replicas, 1. And I need to give it an environment variable. So environment, because we need the DSN, environment, which I always misspell, but I think I have it right there. DSN, colon, space, and this will be our connection string for the database. Host equals Postgres, because that's what this is named on line 30 here. That's the service I'm going to connect to. Port will be 5432, the standard port for Postgres. User is equal to Postgres, which I specified in the Postgres part of this file. Password is equal to password. DB name is equal to users. SSL mode is equal to disable, because we're not using SSL. Time zone is equal to UTC, all uppercase. And connect underscore timeout is equal to, say, 5 seconds. Okay? So there's the Docker Compose. And unless there's a typographical error, which, given my recent history, might be the case, everything should work. Okay, so the next step is to go over to our Authentication service folder and create a Docker file. So a new file, and it needs to be called authentication-service.docker file. And make sure you spell it right, or else the Docker Compose won't work. Now, as a starting point, let me go copy the one from broker service, and we'll just modify it. So I'll copy all of this and go back to my new Docker file right here in Authentication Service and paste it in. So I'm going to call this AuthApp, A-U-T-H-A-P-P. And I'll copy this and paste it in here. And all I have to remember is when I actually build this application, I build it with the name AuthApp. Okay? So let's go to our makefile, and I'll do the Mac and Linux version first, and then I'll do the Windows version after that. So makefile for Mac and Windows is called makefile, and it's inside the project folder. And we're going to want to build our auth. So what I'll do is copy the build broker, paste it in here, and make sure that these are actually tabs and not spaces. That one is, that one is, and that one is. And I'll call this build auth. And I'll change the comment. And build the auth binary as a Linux executable. So we'll change this to building auth binary. And we're going to go into the authentication service. And we want the Go OS to be Linux, CG Go enable to be 0, Go build, and we'll change this to auth binary. And we're going to build in CMD API. That's correct. So now let's go specify the auth binary, which I called AuthApp. So I'll put that right here. Equals AuthApp. And now we want to not just build the broker in when we call upbuild, we want to also build auth. Okay, so that's correct. That looks okay. Is there anything else to change? No, that should be it. Okay, so that's it for the Mac and Linux version. It may not be right, but we'll find out shortly. Let's try the Windows version. And unfortunately, you're not going to get syntax highlighting here, but I should be able to do a little bit of copying and pasting. So I'll open up this makefile, copy this line, because that's not going to change, and then paste it in here. And we're going to want to call build, and it doesn't exist yet, but it will in a minute, auth. And then I'll copy this one, build broker, and paste it in here at the right level and change this to auth and this to auth and this to auth and this to auth. Okay, and we're going to go into the authentication service folder. Authentication, which I have to spell right. That stays the same, that stays the same, and this becomes auth binary. Okay, I don't think anything else needs to change. So let's close this and see if we got it right. So I'll clear the screen. I'll make sure I'm in the project folder, and I'll say make up_build and see what happens. So it's building the broker, building the auth. So far so good, and it died. Undefined format, undefined cores, and that's in root. Well, let's do the main.go first. So main.go, it just didn't import format for me. So that should be right here. FMT. Again, Visual Studio Code is letting me down today. And what was the other error? Cores inside of roots.go. So let's go to roots.go. And we need to import up here. So I'll do it manually. I don't know why it didn't import it for me. github.com/go-chi/cors. Okay, let's try that again. Open the terminal, clear the screen, and run make up build. Looking good. Okay. And it says everything started. Perfect. Let's go look at our Docker desktop dashboard and see how things are going. Now, it might time out the first time because it'll take a while to initialize the database. So Postgres, it's still initializing itself, and it might take more than 20 seconds, so I might have to stop it and start it again, but only the first time. After this, it will have the database all initialized, and it should be much faster to start up. So while that's doing its thing, let's go see what the authentication service is telling me. So authentication service. Good, it's backing off. It's going to time out, I know it is, but that's all right. We'll just wait until Postgres finishes. There, it actually started. Okay, seems to be done. So let's go back here to our terminal and type make down. And that should stop everything. There it goes. And now I'll type make up. And this time, it actually should connect. So let's go back to Docker Desktop. And let's watch the authentication service. There, it connected to Postgres. So now we know we can actually bring up the authentication service and we can connect to the database, and we do have an empty database in Postgres named user. Users, plural. So now we need to go create a table in there and put some data in it so we can actually test this authentication service. And we'll get started on that in the next lecture.